TopMedTalk.
Well, hello and welcome to TopMedTalk Down Under. I'm Kate Leslie and I'm here with my co-host Andy Cumpstey at the Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists and Faculty of Pain Medicine annual scientific meeting in Brisbane. This is a great meeting. It's one of the biggest in the region and full of great sessions, Andy. We've just been to a good one, and I say that because I was one of the presenters.
It was a very good one, Kate. But I mean, you're being very modest again, but we did 2 back-to-back recordings of excellent conversations over lunch, and you ran straight off from here to be the first speaker in the Women's Empowerment and Leadership Initiative session, and you've just run straight back from that to do this conversation, so you've been very busy.
Yeah, and I feel empowered. There you go. It was a really good session. There were loads of women and some really great men there, and we discussed about how to develop the camaraderie and collegiality and culture and the critical mass of women in research at the department and national level. So it was really good.
Some really excellent questions too from the room and from the men and the women in the room. So yeah, it was a really good meeting, really good session.
So right now we've got 2 great guests, the incoming President and Dean at the College and the Faculty of Pain Medicine. And I get to use the word Schadenfreude for the second time today, which for the listeners who are not sure is the pleasure at the misfortune of others, particularly when you've had that misfortune and yourself and survived it. So, Andy, you're going to ask them a few questions about what it might all mean for them on Tuesday.
Oh, absolutely. But before we do that, would you mind just introducing yourselves, to give us your full name and a bit about yourselves for our listeners at home?
Yeah, thanks, Andy and Kate. So I'm Dave Story. I'm the incoming president of the Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists, which I'll call ANZCA. And my background is really as an academic anaesthetist. I'm currently Professor of Anaesthesia at the University of Melbourne, which is one of the major Australian universities. And I head the Department of Critical Care, which covers the 3 critical care specialties of anaesthesia, intensive care medicine, and emergency medicine. My clinical background, I have a particular interest in care of patients, particularly those who are older and sicker. So perioperative medicine comes naturally to me, and I guess the biggest sort of cases I do are liver transplants, but that's now a smaller part of what my day-to-day work.
Excellent, thank you. And yourself, Dilip?
Yeah, I'm Dilip Kapur. I'm the incoming Dean of the Faculty of Pain Medicine. I've been a pain medicine specialist now for something approaching 470 years. I had the great advantage of being trained by giants all the way through. I started off in pain medicine in the UK, working with a number of amazing people. Came to Australia in 2002, and I've worked in pain medicine in Australia since that time. I've been on and off the board of the Faculty of Pain Medicine since 2013, but they never let me off with not doing the work, whether I've been on the board or not. And I worked for many years in public. I maintained an academic interest all through the time when I worked in public, and I still have the academic interest. I'm still publishing stuff here and there. These days I work in what is perhaps conveniently called private, but in actual fact I have a broad spread of work that I do. I work in a general pain medicine practice in Adelaide, but for the last 10 years I've actually also run a country practice in South Australia, which I've loved every single moment of, and more recently in the last 3 years I actually worked providing pain medicine services to an Aboriginal health service in the country as well, which has been an absolute revelation for me. And I think it's one of the great things about medicine. There's always new things to do and new things to find.
Fantastic. And to follow that, I guess the new things to try this time is you were both about to take on, well, the most senior roles in your respective colleges from tomorrow, I believe?
Correct.
So how does that process go about, and what does it mean you're about to do?
So within ANZCA, the president is one of the councillors. So councillors are elected by the fellowship. The usual process is that someone is elected vice president and serve for 2 years under a president and then 2 years as a presidency. So we have early May each year, we have our annual scientific meeting, which is where we are now in Brisbane, and they're rotated around Australia and New Zealand to larger places, because we have, as Kate said, a very large meeting of about 1,600 to 2,000 people. But the presidency, so I take over tomorrow at the end of the meeting, and then I will be president for 2 meetings. And I think the reason I put it in those terms is that it means I will officiate at 2 fellowship ceremonies, which is really one of the highlights of the college. To sit there and see the new fellows coming forward is just fantastic. You see a very happy group of people, their friends, their relatives. And I think now that we're a pretty relaxed group, we had people saying, "There's my mum," and things like that during the ceremony. And that was fantastic. It really had it had the combination of the formality of the robes we were wearing combined with a degree of what I'd call Australian and New Zealand informality.
And so I couldn't attend because it was standing room only, unfortunately. But you were there, weren't you, Kate? And I think the photos were fantastic that I saw.
Yes, I was there, and it was also good to hear about the senior fellows who were recognised for their contributions to anaesthesia and pain medicine. And also the people were hopping up to get a fellowship of ANZCA and FPM, Dilip.
Yeah, that's right. But one of the things that is so reassuring for me these days is from the very start of the Faculty of Pain Medicine, when Professor Michael Cousins, who sadly passed away the week before last, but from that very start, when Michael Cousins had to browbeat ANZCA Council into accepting us, we've now, I think, become one of the jewels in ANZCA's crown. And it's wonderful to be part of this amazing college, the biggest medical college within the region, and certainly to be part of a college that has such a solid academic and clinical background that really extends into all branches of medicine. From the faculty's perspective, one of the interesting things for me has been not just meeting past fellows and our new fellows, but also just to be reminded of the extent to which we have influence throughout the region. So I had a very productive meeting with some of the Hong Kong fellows who remain a very highly valued part of our faculty. And to know that not just our influence, but the interest in what we do sort of comes from across such an enormous region across the world. It's a little bit daunting taking over things, but there's an awful lot of goodwill out there all round. People want us to succeed, and I'm very happy to be part of that.
So what are the key jobs that you're hoping to get done in your tenure as Dean? And may I add that you'll be distracted by things that arise that you're not aware of.
Absolutely.
But at this point, what's your plan?
Never want to quote something like Donald Rumsfeld, but there's the unknown unknowns that will appear out of left field, and those are always there. And there's also the laws of unintended consequences. But in terms of things that I'm really interested in promoting, pain medicine is a fascinating branch of medicine, mainly because it's a bit like anaesthesia. It extends across so many other areas. I want to emphasise for our fellows the importance of professionalism within pain medicine, because the more I hear from patients, the more I actually understand that in many ways we are their last hope. But in actual fact, what we can give them is quite unique, and it's something they've often been without for a very long period of time. And I want to expand the frontiers a little bit of what we do. Certainly, I've been very excited by some of the developments we've had recently in terms of funding. We have access to what we call FATES funding, which is to emphasise training in rural and remote areas through Australia. And that brings me to another area where I think we can do a lot of good and also offer our fellows some fascinating and rewarding work, and that's in engagement with First Nations communities, both in Australia as well as New Zealand, and also to the Pacific, because I'm delighted that my Vice Dean, a wonderful lady from Samoa, and Lenani will be right up there with me doing a lot of the work sort of through these areas. And finally, one thing that I also want to bring to the fore is doctors' welfare. Now, through the college and the faculty, we've spent an awful lot of time looking at the welfare of trainees to make sure we can do our best, and dare I say, David, to make sure that our trainees don't have to go through some of the things that we went through. But by the same token, I don't want us to forget that people after fellowship have an awful lot of responsibility and pressures thrust upon them. I was involved in a piece for the Bulletin recently about some of the pressures that have been put on me a number of years ago, which ended up being a very unpleasant time in my life. And I don't want to see anybody having to go through things like that again. And the college and the faculty have got excellent processes in place for improving things there, but I want to see that go forward further, because here's an interesting thing. I don't know what the figures are like in anaesthesia, David, but in pain medicine, we were expecting to hit a demographic crisis about now with everybody retiring. The great news is no one's retiring. And a lot of folks are staying on a lot longer, but that's great. it's great to have the wisdom and the experience there, but we also need to make certain that we that we can also keep those people engaged and look after them right the way throughout.
Same question to you, I guess, David.
Well, I think going on from a number of the things Dilip said, in no particular order, when you listen to someone speak, I'm thinking, I can think about that and they can think about that. I'd actually reflect, Dilip made the comment about the workforce. So there is the pressure about workforce, and there's also, as Dilip suggested, workforce well-being. I think from a college perspective, that is across the spectrum. It's our fellows, it is our trainees, it's our international medical graduates. But I think importantly, it's also our staff of our college. We want a professional body supporting the fellows who are, their well-being. We need to look after them as well. And I think that's an important part as you take a leadership role in a body such as the college to work with the CEO. Dilip mentioned his own experiences. My personal, I guess, hardship, for want of a better phrase, as a trainee was I actually failed the first part exam twice. And that was despite being a published respiratory physiologist from a very famous laboratory.
I shouldn't laugh, but it was a great story.
Yeah. I failed the first part exam twice, and I realised the second time that it was actually how I organised my thinking. And the lifelong lesson for me is I'm sort of creative in a strange way in that I think of all these things, but actually controlling my thinking and organising it is a skill I've had to learn. And actually Kate's been someone who's helped me do that. But it meant that also I then went on to be a first part examiner. And so when I told my fellow examiners I'd actually failed the exam twice, I sort of got a few funny looks. But I also wrote about that in the college bulletin, that experience of, having, the feeling of not succeeding and that feeling of, well, I might have to do something else, and the importance of your personal supports in getting through those challenges. So that's sort of my own story that I bring to sort of the well-being side of things. I mentioned workforce. We've got massive government pressures around workforce at the moment, which are, not unique to Australia, Aotearoa or New Zealand. But somewhat interestingly, one of the conflicts we have is the Australian government want to attract doctors from New Zealand. And I've said to an Australian politician, we were a Trans-Tasman, across the two countries organisation. It would not be ethically right for us to try and attract anaesthetists, from New Zealand to Australia. So there's some of the pressures we've got around this area, these sort of areas. Education continues to be very important, not only about trainees, but also our professional development. We've just introduced an app to help with CPD, which I think is a major step forward to make that easier. Patient safety and quality of care, and where research and things like that come into it. But the new item, I think, probably for all organisations, including ours, is around data privacy, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. And if we look at our last strategic plan, that's probably been the single biggest change of those two things.
So the college recently launched a chapter of perioperative medicine, which brought to fruition roughly 20 years of activity. You were absolutely crucial because you were the leader of the REASON study. Can you tell us a bit about that, and then your journey through periop medicine, and now as president, what you're going to do to move that forward?
So I think we also need to go back to Michael Cousins, who we were talking about before. He was a giant in pain medicine, but he's also a giant in other innovations at the college, one of them being perioperative medicine. Past President Vanessa Beavis, he got her to lead a survey which helped us inform, which I think comes to no surprise. There are a few anaesthetists who are really keen on perioperative medicine. Majority would rather be in theatre, and that's still fine, and that's probably still the case. And we need, as a college, to be very aware of that some 20 years later. I also got a phone call from Michael Cousins one day, which is a bit like having the voice of God call you, because he's such a powerful person. And he asked me to get involved more with research in the Clinical Trials Network. And as some may know, the ANZCA Clinical Trials Network is probably the world's leading clinical trials network with many large published studies. So
the UK is trying to catch up very quickly behind you, I promise. I'm doing our best.
We won't mention Test cricket. Okay. But what came out of that was an interest in what was actually happening. So we were interested in perioperative medicine, we were interested in clinical trials. And the REASON study had two purposes. One was to look at the outcomes in our countries, but also to start building a network of researchers. And I think observational research is a good place to start. I know, the UK and others are really, even at a trainee level have found that collaborative approach across many centres works really well. So the reason say was probably our first foray really into that approach. And what we did is we looked at about 28 hospitals, from Perth, which is in Western Australia, through to Auckland in New Zealand, and into Darwin, which is in the tropics, to Hobart, which is not quite subantarctic, but but a lot of hospitals, a lot of patients. So we looked at patients aged over 70 staying at least one night. And we found, that the incidence of major complications or mortality was about 5%.
1 month.
1 month, 30 days at 1 month. But importantly, this included both elective and non-elective surgery, so it was across the board. And it also, it was a really good way of snapshot, take in everyone, all data, no one's excluded. But we found that the instance of pretty solid complications such as AMI, and I know the definitions have changed over the last 12 years, but major complications were about 20%. We also found that 1 in 10 were admitted to ICU, and of those, about half were unplanned ICU admissions, which is a sign of badness, if you like. So we found that in this older population, but then also what I called the 3 A's, which was the things that were associated. So increasing ASA, increasing age, acuity, and then the fourth one was albumin. And where we've gone from that is we're now looking, and the big thing that was missing in that was frailty. And I think my other A now is activities of daily living. And then there are other things we can look at. But so that really sort of set the scene in Australia and New Zealand. It not only provided the basis for enthusiasm for our large clinical trials, but it also really got the college interested in this. So where we are now is that we now have a formal qualification. For want of a better name, we could call it a diploma in perioperative medicine. We now have people, we've done a pilot phase. We now have multidisciplinary people engaged in that. So we've involved a number of colleges, including the College of Physicians, the College of Surgeons, the College of General Practitioners. In Australia, we have the Australian College of Remote and Rural Medicine, and they've been engaged as well, and the College of Intensive Care Medicine. So a number of colleges involved, but led by ANZCA, led by the Anaesthetists, and the other colleges have allowed us to do this. So we now have a qualification. The next thing we now have is a chapter, which is a way of bringing people together. We have learnt about faculties, and that may eventually be where we go, but that is, as Dilip will tell you, is quite a complex thing to create and maintain and sustain. So the chapter is now where we can bring people together. We've grandparented about 600 people across those specialties who have prior experience, but also have qualifications in perioperative medicine and research background. So we have a cohort of people who provide our initial group who will be part of the chapter. We hope to then create a fellowship as that is the next stage, to create a network of people interested in perioperative medicine to drive perioperative medicine across Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, but also as part of the broader collaborative movement. The UK, highly successful, and we have a lot of collaboration with the UK. And I think the other country we really also turn to are Canada. So similarly, all three have college-based training programs, which I think bring some of the similarities, but also very much medical anaesthesia-led, and also other components of our cultures and societies, which are quite similar.
So Dilip, I'm going to come back to you. I think it's really inspirational to me to hear both of you actually put training and fellows and the educational role that the college and the faculties have so high up your agenda for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been completely obvious being at this meeting the last few days how in high regard all the trainees are treated around here, and the watching them all collect their gowns for their ceremony on the other night was brilliant. How do they take that next step forward? So in some of the previous conversations we've held this week, we talked about the Emerging Leaders Conference, which again is, I think, a really brilliant initiative that the college is supporting.
Yeah.
What about the next stage after that? How do they get involved with some of the leadership roles that you two have both successfully taken on board over the years, and potentially end up sitting in this chair in the future?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, Andy. Now, to some extent, in the faculty, we have an advantage because we're small, and it means that you can say that everybody knows each other. We could also say there's nowhere to hide. So one of the things about being a relatively small faculty is we can't survive without volunteers, and that becomes obvious to everybody. And the amazing thing is the extent to which we do get the volunteers. Now, we also have an advantage in that the attendance at our meetings is really very good from fellows. Here, whilst we're in this huge meeting here in Brisbane, we have our own areas that we cordon off for pain medicine. I've actually been to some of the anaesthesia sessions since I've been here. I really enjoyed them. But by the same token, we actually have our small sessions here. We will see each other, and it means that I can just sidle up to somebody and just say, I hear you've actually got a bit of an interest in whatever it might be, pelvic pain, and they can't deny it because they may have just stood up and actually. So we can. The intimacy of our small college means that we can actually approach somebody. People generally want to help out, and so. We encourage folks to get involved in our committees from an early stage, also to become involved in areas like being supervised and training at a very early stage, and that keeps people together. And we see people emerge from there whom, as you say, the emerging leaders, they actually become there sort of quite obvious at an early stage. But the other thing that we have is there's a lot of people who want to be involved, who don't necessarily see themselves as at the top of the tree, but I never saw that either. So the other side of things, we've got a lot of people who are quite happy to be there supporting us, and that's how we encourage things. So far, it's still working.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on TopMedTalk Down Under. You've got a lot of work to do in the next few years, and it will be worth it for all of the great experiences that you'll have and the people that you'll meet. And I'm sure you'll look back on it as, one of the best times of your life. So all the best, and thank you once again for being on TopMedTalk.
Thanks,
my pleasure.
Thanks,
my pleasure.
You can find this podcast on our website. It will be emailed to ANZCA trainees and fellows in the newsletter, and we're also on X and on Instagram.
And Facebook.
And
LinkedIn.
Facebook. And LinkedIn.
So come and join the conversation.
Absolutely.
TopMedTalk. Thanks for downloading TopMedTalk. Don't forget to subscribe. Check us out on YouTube and, of course, on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook and X. Also, it's important to remember that TopMedTalk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, evidence-based perioperative medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that, and the way to do that is ebpom.org. Check out our website and find out about some of the incredible conferences we're going to be arranging across the year. ebpom.org.